I'm a bit concerned facing a small blind tight aggressive players 4-bet in this dynamic, but I mean, come on, when we have pocket kings, I'm not going to be that concerned, am I? So I do go ahead and mix in the 5-bet rip.
Hey YouTube.
G'day everyone, welcome back to the vlog. We're about to go to yet another Melbourne home game. I had a great performance in the home game I played last night. Now I've got a full 8 hours of sleep and I'm just raring to tear back into a new home game. So without any further time, let's see if we can match last night's performance and get in the game. Let's go. So I hop into the game at 9:30. We're playing a bit of 1-3, so I buy in for 500. Let's see if I can run it up. So we're starting off with a cheeky bit of 1-3 and the cutoff goes ahead and open limps. Then I'm on the button with Queen 6 of spades. I decide to over limp here. I definitely want to play this hand on the button in position. It's probably just a bit too thin to be raising it up, especially when I don't expect to get many folds. So I call, and then the small blind over limps and the big blind checks. So we're four ways to a flop of Jack 4-3 with 2 spades. Pretty good flop for us. We do flop a flush draw. The action checks to me, and I definitely want to go ahead and semi-bluff here, blast my opponents off of any ace-high hands they have, and build up a pot in case I do get there. So I go ahead and bet 10, and then the small blind goes ahead and check raises it to 25. And then the small blind actually says out loud, I have to raise, I have the ace of spades blocker. The action falls back to me, and definitely want to call here with the 2 spades. Don't want to read into the speech play too much. It very easily could just be a lie, but if they do have ace high, we are very live against that hand and very likely to bluff them off on later streets. So I go ahead and throw in the call, and then we get to see a turn, which is the 5 of spades. Let's go. We do make our flush, and the small blind keeps betting at it. They go ahead and make a 30. Now, interesting whether I want to raise or call here. I've talked on this vlog before about how solvers love to play mate flushes a bit more passive, just because the equities between you and the opponent are going to run pretty close together when both of you have a lot of nut flushes in your range, which in a limp pot I think is definitely going to be the case. So I just decide to call here. Wouldn't hate raising though, definitely a good spot to get some value if the opponent really does have the naked ace of spades, like they said they did on the flop. So I throw in the call, and then we get to see a river, which is the 8 of spades. So awful river for us. We do lose to that ace of spades blocker if they really have it. Then the opponent goes ahead and bets out 10, and definitely think we have a pretty easy call here. I think raising for value will be way too thin. I could totally see the opponent folding the 10 of spades. So I go ahead and throw in the call, and then the opponent shows ace 4 with the ace of spades and the 4 of diamonds. So there you go. They were on the level. They were honest when they said they had the ace of spades blocker, and unfortunate for us that they got there on the river. Next up, I'm under the gun with the second best hand in all of poker, pocket kings. I go ahead and raise it up to 10. And then the MP player, who was the same villain from the previous hand, who would like to be called the Ginger Ninja, they go ahead and throw in the call, as does the cutoff, the button, and the big blind. So we're 5 different ways to a flop of 5-3-3 with 2 spades. The big blind checks it over to me, and I definitely think I want to check back. Really not tempted to bluff into 4 different people, particularly when I think the chances that they all have hands like ace 3 and 4-3 suited is pretty likely. Would rather play to be cautious, let some of the late position players bet off some worse single pair hands. So I check it. The Ginger Ninja goes ahead and bets 20, the cutoff calls, the button calls, and then the big blind goes ahead and raises it to a 100. So pretty interesting spot here, because like I said, I am concerned. The big blind in particular actually probably has more 3x than the rest of us combined, and I do have them labelled as a tight aggressive player anyway. So as tight as it may seem, I could see just going ahead and folding here. But having said that, out of all the hands we're going to check on this board, this is the 3rd strongest one. Probably betting any 3x, and we're going to check pocket 5. So pocket 5s, pocket aces are the 2 stronger hands we have. And if we're folding the 3rd strongest hand we can have here, we're going to be absolutely kicking ourselves when the big blind just has like pocket 8s or pocket 7s. So I do decide to throw in the call, but wouldn't hate folding here. Let me know what you would do in the comments below. And then all other 3 opponents fold. So just heads up with the big blind to the turn, which is the 8 of clubs, putting out backdoor clubs. Then the big blind goes ahead and rips it all in for 340. Yikes, pretty gross spot here. Slide over bet at the pot. Like I said, I'm concerned my opponent does have a hand like ace 3 suited, but being that they called in the big blind closing the action, probably ace 3 offsuit, 6-3 offsuit wouldn't even be that out of the question, so really concerned I do lose to a lot. And additionally, if my opponent did have a hand like pocket 7s or pocket 6s, they're probably not shoving it on this turn unless they are turning their hand into a bluff, which is somewhat possible, I will admit, but I'm really more concerned they have a 3x.
A flush draw is somewhat possible, but the thing is, we have the king of spades, so if we're going to defend with any overpairs, this is kind of one of the worst ones to do it with. So all that in mind, I do decide to fold my pocket kings here. Might seem a bit tight, but what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Next hand under the gun goes ahead and limps, and then a more loose aggressive cutoff raises to 15. And I'm on the button with Jack 9 of hearts, and pretty interesting spot. I could see going with any three of the options. I decided to call in this instance, basically because I don't want to play a pot in position in this game, but cold calling a 5x raise usually isn't the best play, and you're typically going to make more EV by 3-bet or folding, so I could go with either of those options too. Let me know what you think in the comments, but I call the 15, then the Ginger Ninja calls in the small blind, as does the under the gun limper. So we're four ways to a flop of 8-3-3, rainbow with one heart. The action checks to the pre-flop raiser, who c-bets 20. Now the action's on me, and facing a third pot bet on this board when we do have backdoor straights and a backdoor flush draw, I think it's a good spot to continue as a float. I do think a loose aggressive cutoff is probably going to be c-betting pretty wide on this board, and they do have a bunch of ace high, king high, and queen high hands that we're very easily going to be able to bluff them off on later streets. And we could, if they are c-betting too wide, it would make sense to raise here, but I don't like doing that with two players left to act. I think there's a decent chance that they will overcall and put me in a really gross spot with only jack high. So I just decided to call and try and play later streets. And then fortunately for me, the small blind and under the gun both fold. So we get to see a turn, which is the ace of hearts. Let's go. That's a great turn card for us. Gives us a flush draw. And then the cutoff tanks a little bit before checking it over to me. Now, slam dunk bluff spot for me. I'm going to very credibly be able to represent a hand like ace jack with backdoor clubs or backdoor spades. Makes a lot of sense. If I'm going to bet off all my ace x there, I definitely want to have some bluffs as well. This seems like a great hand to use as a bluff here. So I go ahead and bet 70, and then the cutoff tanks a little bit before throwing in the calls. So it's not quite what we wanted to see, but maybe we can get there on the river. And the river is the king of spades. Damn, we don't get there, but when the cutoff checks it over to me again, I definitely want to continue bluffing. I definitely think it's likely my opponent does have a pocket nines through pocket queens type hand, and even an 8x hand that I'm just going to put in a really gross spot if I continue to bet. So I go ahead and make a 120, trying to pull off this bluff, and then the cutoff thinks a little bit before folding their hand. Let's go, we get the bluff through. The cutoff would later insinuate that they did have pocket jacks, so very happy to bluff them off of that hand if that was the case. Next hand under the gun limps, and then the button goes ahead and raises it up to 20. Then I'm in the small blind with pocket kings yet again. Let's go. I go ahead and 3-bet it to 80. Then the action's on the Ginger Ninja in the big blind. He mixes in the 4-bet. He goes ahead and makes it to 20. Under the gun folds and the button folds, and the action's back on me here. And definitely possible the big blind could have aces, but they could also be bluffing. We'll have jacks, queens, ace, king. So I think it's a good spot to get it in against those hands. I rip it all in for about 350 effective, and then the big blind snap calls. They ask if we can run it twice, and that's totally fine by me. Then the opponent shows that they have 8-7 of diamonds. So we've got the live run out on the vlog for you. Let's see if we can hold against 8-7. Pretty good start on the first board. They do turn a straight draw. Then they get there with their straight draw. So GG the villain, they're going to win at least half of the pot. Pretty good start for us. And the opponent's pretty much dead on the turn. So we do end up chopping this pot. Good thing we run it twice, or the opponent definitely would have scooped us here. Next hand, the straddle's on, and I'm in the big blind with jack 5 of diamonds. Folds to me, and I go ahead and open it up to 26. Could see just folding this hand pre-flop, or if you were mixing in a limping strategy, could do that too. I decided to raise in this instance, and then the Ginger Ninja calls in the straddle. So we go heads up to a flop of king, queen, 6 with 2 diamonds. So pretty good flop for us. We do flop the second nut flush draw. I'll go ahead and check it over to the villain. My plan was to check raise with a really strong draw here. Could just lead it out myself though. Either way works in my opinion. Even check calling's a fine play too. But I check it over to the villain, then they check back. So we get a turn, which is the king of clubs. Now I really want to start betting. I really think the opponent's going to bet most of their king x combinations on the flop. Some possibility they check it back with a weaker king, but I think in general their range is going to be a bit weaker here, and maybe we can deny equity to some hands that are like 8 high or something. So I go ahead and bet 40, and then the straddle throws in the call. So we do get to see a river, which is the king of spades, putting out a third king. Interesting whether I want to bluff or not. Part of me really doesn't want to bluff with missed diamonds just because it unblocks my opponent. Having missed diamonds themselves are going to be snap folds. And I think it's much more likely they did river a full house, and even with a hand like pocket twos, I think my opponent might find a hero call. So I just check it over to them. They go ahead and bet 80, and we have a pretty easy snap fold with jack high here. So that's what I do. And then the opponent was actually kind enough to show they did have king 10 offsuit, so they actually did river quads. And yeah, probably not going to be able to bluff them off of quads on the river. Next hand, the same cutoff from the hand where I had jack 9 of hearts, goes ahead and opens it to 10, then I'm on the button with pocket sevens. I decide to mix in the 3-bet here, a bit looser, particularly when I am having a button cold calling range, but I think it might be a good spot to deny equity to a loose cutoff open. So I go ahead and make it 35, and then the Ginger Ninja throws in the cold call in the small blind, and the original raiser folds. So we're heads up to a flop of ace-9 deuce with 2 clubs. The opponent checks it over to me, and I think in a 3-bet pot, particularly against a small blind cold call, this is a great spot to have a range bet, just because I'm going to have so many ace-x hands in my range. So I go ahead and bet 20, and then the small blind throws in the call. So we get to see a turn, which is the 8 of hearts, no help to us. But then the small blind goes ahead and leads at 25. So obviously we're getting great odds on a call here, but very concerned the opponent is playing a bit of stop-go with a weaker ace-x hand. Would make a lot of sense, or they could have turned an 8 with like 10-8 suited or something like that. So despite getting great odds, I wouldn't actually hate just going ahead and folding here, but I get tempted by the good price and do throw in the call. Definitely somewhat possible. They are turning jack 10. You know, they floated with jack 10 and a backdoor flush draw, but they're turning that into a bluff with so much equity. So I threw in the call, and then we do get to see a river, which is the 4 of spades, and then the opponent goes ahead and bets 140. Now I think it's a pretty easy fold at this point. So now that I'm not getting nearly as good a price, I definitely am less tempted to call. My opponent definitely could have a hand like ace king, ace queen, or even ace 4 suited, which got there on the river. Definitely could have, and my opponent's just trying to eke out max value when I myself have ace king or ace queen or ace jack. So with pocket sevens, pretty easy fold. I go ahead and put my hand in the mark, and then the villain was actually kind enough to show us pocket fours, so they actually got there with their set on the river, and pretty happy I folded sevens. Next up, I'm under the gun with pocket kings yet again. Let's go. I go ahead and raise it up to 10. Then the Ginger Ninja in the cutoff 3-bets it to 35. The action's back around to a tight aggressive small blind, who mixes in the 4-bet. They go ahead and make it 120. I'm a bit concerned facing a small blind tight aggressive player's 4-bet in this dynamic, but I mean, come on, when we have pocket kings, I'm not going to be that concerned, am I? So I do go ahead and mix in the 5-bet rip. I shove it all in for about 400, and then the Ginger Ninja throws in the call in the cutoff. Then small blind's in the tank for a little bit before finally folding their hand. The cutoff ends up showing us 6-4 of clubs, so we are in excellent shape. They insist that we run it twice, which is totally fine by me. Now let's see if I hold. So things start off pretty bad. The opponent flops 2 pair and ends up rivering a full house. So no good on the first board like the last time they're going to scoop that. Really have to hope we're good on the second board. Oh, this is such a sweat. They've got a club draw. Ah, my God, they get there on the river. We do hit a set on the river, but they make a flush. So running pretty bad here. The opponent ends up scooping us on both boards with 6-4 suited. We are. Next hand, we've got the straddle on, and an under the gun tight aggressive player opens it to 35. Then the action's round to my small blind, and yet again I have pocket kings. It's definitely the hand of the vlog, and haven't been running great with it so far, but definitely not going to slow me down in this instance. I go ahead and 3-bet it to a 120. Then the action folds back round to the under the gun player, who sort of eyes me down a bit and then shrugs and rips it all in for 500. I snap them off with my kings, and the opponent asks if we want to run it once or twice. I say, let's just go one time. I ask if they wanted to show, and they said they didn't, which is fair enough, but we've got the live run out on the vlog. So starting off on the queen high flop, boom, pretty much have the nuts now. There's a repeat queen on the river, so if the opponent has quads, GG to them, but they end up tapping the table and throwing their hand in the muck. So nice to run pretty good with the kings for once. Next hand, we've got the 1-3-6 game going, and the tight aggressive button opens it to 20. Then I'm in the big blind with ace-10 offsuit. I go ahead and 3-bet it up to 80, and then the button throws in the call. So it heads up to a flop of ace-8-6 with 2 diamonds. The action's on me, and I consider having a range bet on this board just because we do have more of the strong ace-x hands, which is going to be great for us when we do have bluffs in our range. Having said that though, with this hand in particular, I do see a lot of merit to checking. It's one of the more middling strength ace-x hands we're going to have, and we could be value owning ourselves potentially with a bet if we do bluff the opponent off something like pocket 10s or pocket jacks, and being the fact that we the block diamonds with the 10 of diamonds in particular probably is one of the better hands to check. So if you are going with a range bet strategy, good spot to bet this hand, but if you're not, good spot to check it in my opinion. I decided to bet it here, which probably having a checking range might make more sense on this board, but I went ahead and bet 60 and then the opponent throws in the call. So it heads up to a turn, which is the 8 of clubs. I go ahead and check it over to the opponent. I really do think I'm going to save my bets here for my stronger ace-x hands like ace-queen and ace-king to try and build a bigger pot, and it might be a good spot to check it over to my opponent, potentially induce a bluff for them to try and represent 8x or something like that to bluff me off like pocket kings or pocket queens. So I check it over to the opponent and then they check back really quickly. So we see a river, which is the king of hearts. Now, interesting whether we want to bet for value or continue to check. I do think I want to have a pretty polarized betting strategy on this river because I'm going to have all the ace-king combinations and be pretty hard for my opponent to have an 8x hand when they check the turn. So I would really like betting either ace-x, ace-queen, ace-king plus hands, or just betting with my bluffs on this river just because I can credibly represent those really strong hands. When I have a more middling strength hand like ace-10, it could get into that potential value ownage territory if I do use a larger sizing with my bets. So I decided to check this one in this instance. Let me know what you would do in the comments below. I think it's an interesting spot. But then my opponent pretty much snap checks back, so we know we have the effective nuts now. I turn over my ace-10 and the opponent mucks. Next hand's just a straight 1-3. Then I'm under the gun with pocket jacks. I go ahead and open it up to 10. Then a tight aggressive button calls, as does a tight aggressive big blind. So 3 different ways to a flop of king, jack, deuce, rainbow. Let's go, we hit middle set. When the action checks to me, definitely want to go ahead and bet my set here. I make it 15, and then the button calls and under the gun folds. So we get to see a turn, which is the 9 of clubs, putting out the 4-card rainbow. So not the best turn card in the world. Queen 10 offsuit does get in, which is a very likely hand the button could have. But in spite of this, still definitely want to continue to bet. Definitely can try to maximize value against king queen and king 10. So I go ahead and make it 50, and the button tanks a little bit before throwing in the call. So we're still heads up to a river, which is the 8 of spades. Now the action's on me, and I definitely want to continue to bet here, try and get max value with a hand as strong as set, where my opponent can definitely have a strong king X like king queen or potentially even ace king. I think they might flat on the button occasionally. So considering the SPR is about 1.25, definitely think it's a good spot to rip it all in and try and get maximum, literally maximum value from king queen. So I go ahead and rip it all in for 210. Then my opponent is in the tank and they're in there probably half an hour, and eventually they just like shrug their shoulders and sigh, whatever, and they throw all their money in the middle, and then I show them my middle set and they end up mucking their cards. Let's go. Absolutely stoked that I did go all in on the river, because clearly I got maximum value from them. Next hand is a straight 1-3, and I'm in the cutoff with ace jack of hearts. I go ahead and raise it up to 10, and then the Ginger Ninja on the button 3 bets at 230, and then action falls back to me. I decided to throw in the call here. Definitely some merit to 4 betting, but want to defend my cutoff opening range with some strong ace-x hands, and I choose to use ace-jack suited in this spot. So I throw in the call, and then we heads up to a flop of 10-8-3 rainbow with 1 heart. I check it over to the villain, who goes ahead and c-bets 15. I think facing this small of a c-bet, definitely want to continue with a hand as strong as ace-high. So particularly when we do have a backdoor flush draw. So I throw in the call, and then we get to see turn, which is the ace of diamonds putting out backdoor diamonds. Let's go, we do turn top pair. I check it over to the opponent, who checks back very quickly. So after they check back very quickly, definitely feeling confident that we do have the best hand here. So when the river is the 2 of hearts, definitely want to bet for value. I go ahead and make it 80, definitely want to use a larger size, try and capitalize value when my opponent did check back a weaker ace-x hand on the turn that they're planning to call with on the river. Plus, if they do want a hero call with a hand like pocket kings or pocket queens, want to get max value from that hand as well. So I made it 80, and then the opponent is in the tank a very long time. They start talking to me, and they're like, oh, I just can't believe you rivered ace deuce like this, oh my god. And then they tank for a while before throwing in the call. Then I show my ace jack, and they end up mucking the hand. So there we go. To finish off the session with the last interesting hand, we rake in a pretty nice pot here. Let's go. So those were the most interesting hands I played across the session, and in terms of how I feel about my play from this session, I'm going to land on a B+. I really do like a lot of the decisions I made this session. I feel like when I did have Pocket Kings pre-flop, I definitely tried to push my equity as far as I could in terms of getting hands all in pre-flop. It didn't always work out for me the best when I rolled the dice, but was happy to take that gamble when I could, and happy with that overall, as well as trying to maximize value when I did have a hand like a set. In terms of decisions I didn't like from this session, I felt like I was very liberal with my button calls, and you do definitely want to play hands when you're on the button, but maybe I just pushed it a little bit too far this session, and I was very happy with my play this session, but maybe pushed those button calls a bit too far, which is why I have to land on the B+ and not an A for today's session.
Okay, so it's about 3 a.m. and I am in the parking lot of the fine establishment we play poker in this evening. I only ended up playing about 5.5 hours this evening with the latest start. Some new players came into the game at around 2 a.m. and sort of slowed it down to a snail's pace, and I'm like, this game is not worth losing sleep over anymore playing this slow, so decided to jet out a little bit earlier than I normally would. But after the 5.5 hours, ended up buying in for 1,600 and cashing out for 1,550. So $50 loss on the session, which is definitely not too bad considering how awful I ran during the start of the session. And you don't want to be too emotionally attached to what your results are in poker, but I would be absolutely lying through my teeth if I didn't admit that getting unstuck is one of the best feelings in all of poker. That's going to wrap up the vlog for today. Thanks for sticking all the way to the end. That really helps my channel's analytics, and I do appreciate it. If you haven't already, hop in the comments below. Let me know what you think of these individual hand histories, what you would do in them. But for now, I'm out of here. Peace.